Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I am very excited because for the month of May 2022, I finally made it through 7 books, getting back on track to reaching my reading goal for the year. I am now just 1 book behind after February totally blindsided me with a real struggle to get through the books I was reading that month, but I was able to make it through 7 books. 3 of them are nonfiction, which is interesting. I'm on like a serious nonfiction kick right now. I've been doing a lot of like spooky tourism and traveling, and therefore I am reading a lot about like the histories of hauntings in certain towns, and then like very famous true crime cases about places that I have visited recently. So let's go through my books. I have, let's see, 3 novels, 3 nonfiction works, and 1 collected short story collection. That is not the right phrase, but 1 short story collection, 1 collection of short stories. But yeah, let's dive right on in. So first up, I read All These Subtle Deceits by C.S. Humble. This came in my April 2022 Nightworms package, and was part of their like horror possessed theme for that month. This is very I'm not sure. This is very like Exorcist inspired in not as creepy of a way. This is the story of an excommunicated exorcist who still practices, and his ability to help a girl who has just moved to, I believe, Colorado. Yeah, Colorado. And help her kind of exorcise what he believes to be demons. I thought this is really interesting because it really does not play up the controversy of, is it mental health issues or is it a demon? In this, the demons are demons, the ghosts are ghosts, the phantoms are phantoms, which I did kind of like. I love this cover artwork. I thought it was really cool. And it was really about it until the very end. So I will be straight up, this was a 4-star read for me, pretty much because there was so much buildup and character development towards the first half of the book, and then everything just kind of spiraled into the climax. And it just felt very rushed, and I feel like had there been like an extra 30 pages, not even, to just really explain the lore and mythology of what was happening, that this would have made way more sense and been a lot more tangible and more gripping and exciting. So it did kind of fall apart towards the very end. I felt like C.S. Humble wasn't quite sure how to nail the landing. But up until that point, I really liked it. I really liked our characters. I really liked our exorcist William, and I really liked our main character Lauren, and I really loved all of William's ex-girlfriends. They were really fun and charismatic and funny, and just added not only to the plot, but also to his character development as well. So very fun read, not super scary. If you want something that's going to be like Exorcist vibes, but not terrifying, this is a great place to start. Again, 4 stars. First time reading C.S. Humble, and I did enjoy it. Okay, next up is The Fervor by Alma Katsu. I'm not going to talk too much on this because I do have an entire video review on this novel. But this was one of my top most anticipated reads for 2022. I do really like Alma Katsu's writing, and I love how she weaves historical fiction with like supernatural folklore. She's done that in her breakout like horror novel The Hunger, as well as her follow-up novel The Deep. The Hunger talking about the Donner Party, The Deep about the Titanic, and The Fervor is about the Japanese internment camps during World War II. I didn't realize how historically accurate this novel was because I had never heard of some of the events that actually happened that are also in this novel, and some of the characters that are in this novel are real. That being said, I did not find this book to be scary, and I liked the sprinkling of Japanese folklore throughout it, but I felt like that wasn't really the focal point. A large part of this story is attempting to show the reader that the real monsters in this novel are not the supernatural spiders, because trigger warning if you're scared of spiders, there's a ton of spiders in here. Not in a scary way though, because I'm really scared of spiders and I was like not unnerved by this at all. But that the people in this situation, like the people who placed all of the Japanese into these internment camps, that they are actually the bad guys, and the huge racist population of, what is it, the 1940s, early 30s, late 30s, are truly, yeah, 40s, are truly the monsters in this. Now, while I really like that message, and I really like how Amakatsu is trying to tie it back to a lot of things that are happening culturally today, she did a lot of telling and not a lot of showing, and I feel like this book could have been really, really strong had she just shown what she was trying to get across instead of kind of whacking the reader on the head with what she was trying to say over and over and over again. It was very blunt, it was very literal, and I feel like it would have been more effective had it not been written in that style. That being said, this was like a fun, quick, easy read. This could be a great like thriller beach read. Again, not scary, definitely more on the thriller mystery side of things, but again, very, very historically interesting. There's a lot of things that after I read this, I went through and Googled to see if they actually happened, and a lot of things did. Including the air balloon bombs that Japan sent over to America, which I'd never heard of before, and that was crazy, and they were real. But yes, so if you're interested in something like this is a 3-star read for me. Not great, not awful. If you like Amakatsu's writing, I feel like you'll enjoy this. Alright, next up, I also have a full video review on this novel. This is The X-Hex by Erin Sterling. This surprisingly was a 4-star read from me. I am not a big fan of romance novels, like, at all, but spooky, witchy, fall, Halloween-oriented romance novels, sure, I will absolutely read that. I kind of put off reading this for a while, and I kind of regret that because this was such a fall-centric, autumnal, Halloween kind of moment that I wish I had read it in the autumn. So if you're looking for a really good thing to read leading up to Halloween, check this one out. It's a great palate cleanser. It has a few teeny tiny, like, kind of creepy moments. Very witchy, very magical. Going into it knowing that it was very much a romance novel, I was able to just accept that and then paid more attention to kind of like the quirky funness of it. Very cute, very fun, very campy. I like the witchcraft, and I really love the town. And it just gave me such like Halloween Town meets Sex and the City vibes. I know I said that in my initial like in-depth review of this, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. This is the story of a teenage girl who accidentally hexes her ex-boyfriend when they break up, and like 9 years later they meet up again, and the hex has come to fruition, and now she's gotta like unhex her ex, I guess. I don't know. It's cute, it's quirky, it's a great palate cleanser, and if you just want something fun and lighthearted that still kind of has that magical vibe, check this one out. And again, that was 4 stars from me. Like, I'm stunned that I really, really enjoyed that book. I really do not like romance novels like that, but I thought this was really fun. I've been reading a lot of heavy stuff and watching a lot of like kind of heavy documentaries and films lately, so I really needed a fun, quirky palate cleanser. Next up is my first nonfiction book of the month, and this is Haunted Providence, Strange Tales from the Small Estate by Rory Raven. For those of you guys who do not know, I love haunted tourism. I love going to spooky places, and Providence, Rhode Island is one of my favorite places in America to visit. Super spooky. If you're really interested, I have an entire video on spooky things to do around Providence, Rhode Island, including visiting the Lizzie Borden house. There's a bunch of Cthulhu-y things to do in Rhode Island as well because it is the birthplace of H.P. Lovecraft. And this was just a really cool, fun, kind of touristy guide for haunted places in Providence. Some places I've already known about and visited, other places I had never heard about. And I also really like this Haunted America series because it dives real deep into the history of the cities and towns. And I'm somebody who I really like learning about history, but I have to do it in a specific lens. For example, it was really difficult for me to kind of grasp world history until I took art history, and art history kind of parallels a lot of the events and things that happened in world history because they happen simultaneously. And so that is kind of how in high school I really learned and grasped world history. So same thing goes with this, and I really like the kind of like fun, ghostly happenings and goings on that you can get out of these books. So again, 4-star read for me on Haunted Providence. Really, really love it. If you've never been to Providence and you feel like checking it out, it's a cute little vacation spot. It's a great little town. My boyfriend and I debated moving there many, many times, and maybe that'll happen eventually. But yes, that was just so fun and cute and quaint, and there's usually very, very brief reads. So if you really want to just pick one up before you go on your next vacation, I highly recommend the Haunted America books. Okay, next up, I finally got to If It Bleeds by Stephen King. I mentioned this in a prior video, but I did but I picked this up and was doing a buddy read with my friend Blackacre Doe on this novel. Blackacre Doe is my favorite person to do buddy reads with. He's so fun and always has so much more insight on things than I would have picked up on, and just a totally different perspective on things. And so it was such a joy to read this with him. But this is a collection of 4 stories, and they are, and I'm going to just go through each story, honestly, and do like a little mini review on them, because I think it's easier to do that. Overall, this was a 4-star read from me. This is Stephen King, who, as you know, is my favorite author. His newer works I don't tend to love as much as his older works. I feel like a lot of people feel that way. But I've been really invested in reading a lot of his new literature. I rate Stephen King books in a completely different manner. If this had been written by any other author, this collection probably would have been a 5-star read for me. I literally enjoyed every single story in here. However, it is King, and I have read much, much better from him. Not to say that any of this is bad, so it got knocked down to a 4-star read. So first up was Mr. Harrigan's Phone. I think this is my favorite story in this collection. Pretty much the story of, can the dead contact you through an iPhone through the afterlife? It's very nostalgic. It's set in like the early 2000s. The main character in this is about the same age as me, so a lot of his childhood experiences I really connected with, because I remember growing up with the birth of the iPhones and like not understanding smartphones and technology. And it's also about his relationship with a very, very rich, retired old business entrepreneur, and how they kind of shape each other. Really cool, really spooky. I really like how it goes into the character development of our main character, who is, for the most part of the story, between the ages of like 11 and like 20, I want to say. And I just really, really liked it. I love when Stephen King writes younger characters. I think he's at his strongest point writing youthful characters. Again, it is my favorite novel, and I really, really loved Mr. Harrigan's Phone. I don't really want to go too in-depth onto what these stories are about, because I think they stand very strong on their own, and I think you'll get a lot out of these stories by going into them kind of blind. And that is most especially true for The Life of Chuck. I don't really want to say anything about this story. I will say this is one of the most heartbreaking stories I think I've ever read from Stephen King. Also one of the most human. It was very hard to get through, because it is, the more you read it, really just unnerving and unsettling and sad. And it's not really scary the way the other stories kind of are. It's more like a snapshot of life. Like if you've ever read Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, which is one of my favorite stories ever, primarily for Kurt Vonnegut's outlook on how life works and the cyclical nature of it. This is Stephen King's version of that. It's not cyclical or anything, but it's definitely a really weird, introspective way to look at life, and I thought it was brilliant and very heartbreaking at the same time, and I highly recommend reading it. Next up is If It Bleeds, the title story of this collection. It is a follow-up to Stephen King's novel The Outsider, which is a spin-off of his Mr. Mercedes trilogy, which I have not read that yet. I'm going to, but I have read The Outsider. I will say, to read this, you probably should have read The Outsider first. In all actuality, you probably should have read all of the Mr. Mercedes trilogy first as well, but this story banks so heavily on what happens in The Outsider and will fully ruin the ending of that story for you. And you kind of need an understanding of everything that's set up in The Outsider to understand kind of like the creature in If It Bleeds. But I really, really liked the concept. I love reading about Holly Gibney. She is one of my favorite Stephen King characters. I love how much Stephen King loves writing about her. You can just feel that she is one of his favorite characters as well. And so there's just so much joy reading about her like quirky nature. And If It Bleeds is just a great continuation of Holly's story. And he has hinted or said that he will be releasing a Holly book sometime in the next year or so. So definitely check out If It Bleeds if you love Holly Gibney, because I do. And I thought this was a really cool way to kind of spin off The Outsider. To be perfectly honest, it had a much better ending than The Outsider. Stephen King's endings on his shorter works tend to be much stronger than his endings on his longer works. And then finally, Rat. Rat, and Stephen King kind of alludes to this in his story. It's pretty much his version of The Monkey's Paw. But from more of like a literary perspective. I really liked Rat. I thought it was definitely the weakest story in this collection, but I did like it. And the only reason I think it's weak is because it is a story I've heard a million times, but now I get the Stephen King take on it. Thought he did a really great job with it. I thought the rat was creepy. I loved how he's just kind of slyly introduced, and I love how everything in that story, no matter how minor the detail is, comes back in the end of the story to mean something a lot more. So really had fun with If It Bleeds. And I adore Stephen King. I know a lot of people don't like a lot of his newer literature. I definitely think that there's more strong literature in his earlier days, but I don't think that he is a bad writer at all nowadays. I really did like The Outsider. I really loved The Institute, and I thought If It Bleeds was great. So there you have it. Okay, so next up, and I will talk a lot more about this book in my Dark Tourism Chicago video that I have coming up. I'm actually going to be filming it right after this. But this is Haunts of the White Cities, Ghost Stories from the World's Fair and the Great Fire in Victorian Chicago by Ursula Bielski, with foreword by Jeff Mudgett, who was, I think, the great-great-grandson of H.H. Holmes. He's some kind of descendant of H.H. Holmes, I forget what. But this was really interesting. Again, this is a Haunted America series. I picked this up at City Lit Bookstore in Chicago because I was in Chicago and I wanted to read about the spooky things. There are some real gems in here, but this book is about 3 times the length of normal Haunted America book, and it felt like that. This book kind of suffers from a lack of photography as well. What kind of makes the Haunted America series so great is there's so many photos. So even if you've never been somewhere or it doesn't look like it did back then today, you can see and kind of get a feel. This book really was like slacking on the photos, so it made it really hard to visualize where I was and what was happening. I felt like you really had to know Chicago like the back of your hand to really get this book. I've been to Chicago twice now and I felt a little lost reading this. And the author put a lot of her own personal stories into this book, making it feel almost cheap, because it would be a lot of her testimony and not other people's testimony onto things being haunted. And not that that's bad by any means, but it's a bit of a stretch to try and convince me that a Jackson Pollock painting is haunted when there's so many different artifacts in the Art Institute of Chicago, and yet for some reason it's a Jackson Pollock painting that's haunted. So just little things like that. She really droned on a lot. But then she did have some chapters, especially on the Congressional Hotel, right? I believe that was the name of it, that were absolutely awesome. The whole chapter on the Graceland Cemetery was really cool. And so there were definitely moments where I felt really invested in this book, and then also moments where I was just like, this is just going on and on and on, and I don't understand why. So not my favorite of the Haunted America books. It was still a 3-star read for me because I did get a lot out of it, and I will be talking about it more in my upcoming video. But yeah, I had to read it. Kind of wish it had been, you know, really trimmed down by an editor. The introduction by Jeff Mudgett is pretty cool. I really can't wait to read more about him. I'm planning on reading a book on the biography of H.H. Holmes soon. And I know Jeff Mudgett has an entire like series on, I think it's History Channel, called American Ripper, about his theory that H.H. Holmes is Jack the Ripper. I don't believe that theory for a couple of reasons, but I do think that he's an interesting guy and has some interesting theories. Okay, and then last but not least, continuing with my haunted tourism, I finally read Escape from Alcatraz by J. Campbell Bruce. This book was fascinating. I read like 1 chapter of it like a month ago and then devoured the entire rest of the book in 2 days. I went to visit Alcatraz back in March. I have an entire video on that as well. Alcatraz is really cool, and I will say I benefited a lot from having visited the jail before reading this. It gave me a lot of visuals that I probably wouldn't have had from just the descriptions of this book alone. But this talks about all of the like famed escape attempts at Alcatraz, along with the history of the jail. And I did not realize how inhumane the first like 10 years that Alcatraz worked as a federal prison, how like inhumane it treated the prisoners. Now granted, there are some prisoners in there who it's like, I don't feel too bad that they kind of like ended their days in misery for after the horrible crimes they committed. But there's a lot of people who were sent to Alcatraz for very minor things. Like there was somebody who stole like, I think $1.50 from somebody and ended up in like Alcatraz for like 10 years. And I think it's really interesting because Alcatraz is painted as like this prison for like the worst offenders, like the people who couldn't stay in the supermax security prisons elsewhere that had to get sent here. And it kind of started off true at the very beginning, and then kind of became like nah, like this person's giving us problems because they're annoying, or we just don't like this person at this jail, so we're just gonna send them to Alcatraz to get them out of the way. And then you find out that they like stole a car, and then we're like sentenced to life. So it's really interesting on like the hypocrisy of Alcatraz, the history of Alcatraz, the inhumane practices that were there, and how Alcatraz actually used psychological torture versus physical torture on a lot of the prisoners for the first, I think, 2 wardens. And we're only 4. The 3rd warden was kind of awesome. But yeah, and then all of the escape attempts are insane, especially the most famous one, which is the Frank Lee Morris and Anglin brothers escape, where we do not know what actually happened to them, if they made it or not, and that is fully detailed in this book. This book was originally written in 1962, updated in like 1973, I want to say. So the author was very close to everything that was happening. I believe was actually able to get in and interview a lot of actual prisoners there. So I found this book absolutely fantastic. This was a 4-star read for me, and I adored it. I was just like shocked by all the things I did not know about Alcatraz. And a lot of things that they did not tell me on the tour, a lot of things that they really, really downplayed, like the, there's a moment where a lot of the inmates actually take over the jail, but they weren't able to escape because they didn't have this key. I did have to buy a replica of it, which I thought was awesome. And they weren't able to get out of the actual like building. And they made it just seem like, oh, and then everything was fine after that, and we were able to take it over again. Like, and then the guards were able to take it over again. That's not at all what happened. Like, they had to call in the military, they had to call in the Coast Guard. Like, all these crazy things happened because these inmates could not find this key. So really fascinated to like learn more in depth about all of these escape attempts that weren't quite explained to the full nature on the Alcatraz tour. Not that the Alcatraz tour is bad at all. I thought it was absolutely fascinating and I highly recommend it. But I will say the book does benefit from having been to Alcatraz before reading it. It will help you a lot with the visuals. The author really does assume kind of that people just understand what he's talking about from like a visual perspective, and I don't think that quite clicks, hence the 4 stars instead of 5 stars. Anyway, so those are the 7 books that I got through in the month of May 2022. I'm so happy I got through all of them. I'm currently reading The Trial of Lizzie Borden, which is another true crime case because I went to the Lizzie Borden house, as I mentioned earlier. And I'm just on this huge nonfiction kick, which is so weird for me because it's usually so hard for me to read nonfiction. But I think all of my travels have really kind of bolstered that. I'm going to Scotland, Dublin, and London, so I will be doing a lot of videos on the haunted tourism of that. I was originally supposed to go to Berlin. We can't anymore, so we're going to Edinburgh. I think that's how you say it. I know I'm probably saying it wrong. And like Loch Ness out in Scotland, which is going to be great. And then obviously Dublin and London. Got my book on Jack the Ripper. So I'm really excited to do some haunted tourism on that. I will probably be reading a lot of nonfiction in the month of June, just so you guys know. Anyways, that's all that I have for you guys today. As always, I post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. As I've said, a lot of my Saturday videos will not be getting posted probably until I get back from Europe. And as always, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah.